Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. Again, this is Angela Hernandez with the Office of Indian Education, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us to talk about annual performance reporting. For those of you who are FY17 and FY18 grantees, you should have received a notification, hopefully through G5, that you now have an APR that's open for populating and completing. If you run into any problems with that, I'll just ask you to send me an email offline later if you need further assistance. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide. So today it'll be the friendly duo of me and Sarah, my colleague on the contracted side, as you guys know, from Synergy Enterprises International, and we also have joined with us today a number of other Synergy staff supporting this work. Thank you. Next slide. So for those of you who joined us for last week's overview of how to enter data in the PDP DCS, that's the Professional Development Program Data Collection System. You'll recall that you saw this slide already, so it's more of just a reminder to folks that we're asking you to report in two different places, two slightly different types of data. So I just want to go back and remind you that the DCS is what you as grantees, meaning the project director typically, or your project coordinator, if they're the ones that provide the data, have access, as well as participants, to seeing the exact cost amounts and the status of every participant in your respective grants. And it's managed by Westat ANLAR. And if you have any access issues or other technical issues, I just want to remind you to please reach out to the help desk that is managed from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. They can support you, and or if your participants need to get access for any reason, to contact that help desk. What we're going to be talking about today is the annual performance report, or the Ed 524 forms that you are familiar with completing through G5. Again, project directors have access to G5. It's where you're able to view, if you've requested and been authorized to access funds drawdown activity, and it is the one vehicle for you to submit the Ed 524 annual performance report. Next slide. So the deadlines are pretty close together. That doesn't always happen with these reporting cycles, but for this year it will. And I'll talk about this a little bit. We're going to certainly try to move up the reporting. We have moved up the reporting cycle for you guys for APRs for this year, meaning typically I don't have you have this due until the end of April, sometimes the end of May. For lots of reasons, we're asking you to complete your progress to date through March 30, or that will be due March 31st, and through as far into March as you can get, basically, in your reporting. The PDP DCS data will be due on April 1st. Really critical reminder, whether you're a 16 and a no-cost extension period, or a 17 or 18 grantee, you are all required to provide any updated data to date in the PDP DCS. For the purposes of annual performance reporting, only FY17 and FY18 grantees are required to report on an annual performance report. For those of you with a final performance report, you would have already received a guidance letter, a notification letter, back in December that set a list of dates by PR award number when your final performance report would be due. But regardless of the length of your no cost extension, whether it was 1 month or 12 months, you are not required to complete an annual performance report. So I did just want to make sure we clarify. So if there's anybody on here that doesn't have an APR due, i.e. you are an FY16 with a no cost extension period, you're welcome to stay on, but you don't need to worry about having to report on an annual performance report. Next slide. where to report. So obviously you're going to the G5 system, g5.gov. I always want to remind you all to call your attention to the website hours of operation. Be sure that when you're thinking or planning on a date or time to enter the data, that you're looking at the schedule of availability and unavailability on the part of G5, because those are pretty set hours for the most part, that are just updates that have to happen in the system. For lots of different reasons. And so just make sure that as you're planning and to block out time to do this, that you do it during a time when you know G5 is available. And if there's any kind of emergency unavailability, it will also be listed typically on that homepage or the news and events section. And then obviously you need an email ID and password. Unless you're new to this process, you should be familiar with how to do that. And if you need assistance accessing, it's a different help desk. It's a G5 help desk. And again, their hours are 8 to 6 Eastern, Monday through Friday. And you'll see on the homepage, without having to log in, both an email as well as a local number or toll-free number that you can use to get support. Next slide. So no surprises. They're the same forms you've been filling out for the last couple of years. And over the next few slides, I'm going to ask Sarah to walk you through each of the forms, specifically the cover sheet, the executive summary, and then sections A through C. It's, as you know, they're in G5, but if you need to look at them without needing to bother for the moment logging into G5, you have that nice URL that we've provided here, where you can just look at those forms independent of having to go into G5 if you need to take a quick peek. And if you haven't already, Sarah, I'll just ask you to put that URL in the chat box so folks can easily link to that if they want and follow along. I want to remind folks that as you move into the reporting, even if you have prior year, these forms, like every other form with the federal government, get updated periodically. There's a new expiration date for the set of APR forms that you're going to be filling out. And Sarah will make mention of this as she walks through these. So please don't use the older versions. Older versions mean that there's an OMB expiration date listed on the upper left-hand corner. Make sure you're not using something that's expired. So just a reminder there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. All right, so we're going to walk through each of the parts that you're going to be filling out with the paper forms here, but you'll be doing it in G5, but it's all of the exact same information. So one of the things I want to point out is where you can find that expiration date to make sure you're not using an old form, because I almost guarantee any that you have saved on your computer right now are expired, because the old expiration date was back in August of 2020. So most likely anything you have on your computer right now is on an expired form. So you'll want to make sure to get the new form that does not expire until this summer. So up here in this top corner of these pages, you'll see these are the up-to-date forms. So you'll just want to make sure that if you're referencing any of that to start getting your reporting materials together, that you're looking at the appropriate form. So this is your cover sheet. This is the first thing that pops up in your list of things that you'll need to complete as part of your reporting package in G5. You'll be able to complete this, and you'll see in a minute it will need a signature. So it's something that you'll want to complete most likely on your paper form, the non-expired one. Get it signed, and then you can scan it and upload it. So as we go through, some of the particularly important parts here are your PR award number. Make sure you're using the correct PR award number for whichever award you're working on. I know some of you have multiple awards, so you'll just want to make sure you're using the right one for each thing. Next up is this reporting period information. you want to make sure that you're putting in the appropriate reporting period. So for your APR due now, your reporting period is 10/1 of 2020 to 3/1 of 2021. So in particular, the part that kind of tends to trip people up is that end date. Yes, this year is not over, but your report right now is reflecting information up through March 1st, 2021. Next up is the budget part. So number 8 on your form, as we look at this piece, 8A is asking for your previous budget period. Your previous budget period was the last grant year. So that's from October 1st of 2019 to September 30th of 2020. And it's asking for your total expenditures. When you're thinking about those total expenditures, you want to make sure that that information is going to match with G5. So if you're kind of unsure on that part, you can always look at that possibly in G5 if you have that view only access for budgetary information there. Otherwise, you'll need to talk with your budget office. When you look at 8B, it's asking for your current year's expenditures. So again, we'll want to know those expenditures from October 1st of 2020 to the end of this current reporting period that you're doing your APR for, March 1st, 2021. If you need to get those numbers from your budget office, I would encourage you literally go ahead and set to email on March 1st, because if your budget office is any like any of the ones I've ever worked with, it maybe is not the most expeditious information sharing. So you may need a few days or even a few weeks to get that info and make sure it's correct. So you'll want to request it like on March 1st to have the information effective as of that date, and then be able to report it by the reporting deadline at the end of March. 8C, leave it blank. You only complete 8C when you do your final performance report. So none of you should be completing that on this reporting. All right. Next up is the really large chunk of number 9. If you're claiming indirect cost, make sure that on number 9 there, where it says, are you claiming indirect costs under this grant, that you mark yes. And then you're going to have to mark at least one thing on that B through E section, just indicating what type of indirect cost rate you're using and what that rate is. So make sure that if you are claiming and drawing down indirect funds, then you mark yes and then indicate that rate there. Yeah.
Excuse me, Sarah, I'm going to pop in just for 1 second. I'm not sure if you're able to blow up that image at all, probably not. But what I'll say there, as I'm straining here, one thing is that because this is a program that is unique from most of our others, meaning it's a training program, I know that, and you guys know that virtually all of you report at 8%. I think it would be helpful if you just note that you are claiming and go ahead and put 8%, even if, for example, your agreement might read something higher. So that will just be helpful. So we're clear that you're claiming only that 8%. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to me directly. But for the most part, I see that there is that option under E.
Yes.
And you should be able to address it there. But just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page about that, that it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. I will say sidebar as well, Sarah, most of our folks have provided, as Donna Sabis Burns, our group leader, requested last week, provided an updated IDC rate agreement, which is something we need to have on file. That typically has to happen every year, which I know it probably hasn't with me in the last couple of years, but you guys submit it with your applications, but keeping that updated valid cost agreement is really important. So just something to think about as we move forward. Thank you.
Great. All right, so after you indicate your indirect cost rate, most likely that 8%, and denote that, then you're going to head down to numbers 10 and 11. So for number 10, everyone is going to be marking not applicable. And for 11, everyone is going to be marking yes. All right, and then we move to the back of the form, page 2. So when we get to the back of the form, and this is also a great way to see if you have an old expired one. A lot of the old expired ones don't have that number 11. But here on the back, the next important part is number 12 about your performance measures. So it's asking you, are you going to be indicating your complete data for the year in this report? If you are, mark yes. Most likely you're not, because you're reporting in March and the grant year goes through September. So most likely there are going to be some changes in your data between March and September, so that you're not reporting complete data at this point. You may have some that you're waiting on information to come in, or waiting on graduations and different things. That's fine. Just make sure to mark no. Okay. And then make sure, and right up here, this is the important little spot, indicate a date when you believe that you're going to have that complete data and can submit that to the department. Typically that's going to, normally be available then September, sometimes beginning of October. So just think about, based on the things that you're going to be reporting on, and then we're going to talk about in the next few pages of this, when will you have that complete data available? And then the last bit here is in regards to a signature from your authorized representative. This does need to be signed, and then it will be uploaded. So typically you can upload it into G5. Some of you may have experienced the finicky nature of G5. If for some reason it will not take your upload and is not allowing you to upload that particular document, you can also email it to Angela. So try to upload it first, because that's the easiest way, then everything's in the right spot. But if for some reason it's not accepting that upload, you can email that signed cover sheet over to Angela. This also brings up just a quick reminder from the TA team. So we have been working to confirm all of your contact information, and thank you to so many of you who have gotten back and let us know your correct information. If you have not, if you could do that, that would be great. And really think about who that authorized representative is for your grant. Really look at that in the information that you are confirming, because that's who has to sign this. So if that's someone who is no longer available, no longer with your organization, not the right person, that can slow down your ability to then submit your APR in a timely manner. All right, the next piece is your executive summary. Now, if you're looking for this in the forms on that website, it's actually in the same form that you download with your cover sheet. It's the third page of that when you download it. But in the actual G5 system, you'll be able to upload it separately or in the same, whatever's easier. So the important things on this executive summary, you'll see it's a very basic page. So with that, we ask that you keep your executive summary to 2 pages. I'll show you another place in your reporting where any additional information could go. But remember, this executive summary is just meant to highlight your achievements and progress towards your project's goals. So talk about how you have met expected outcomes and performance measures. Maybe you exceeded them, maybe some that you've fallen short of or you're not achieving in the timeline in which you thought, and some challenges that you've encountered with those. Things like project director turnover or the impact of COVID, different things that may be impacting your progress towards your project goals and objectives. And then also think about any contributions that your project has made to research, knowledge, practice, and or policy. So this is really a high-level overview of what's going on in your project and what's been going on this year. So 2-page maximum. There is another spot for more information. Now we'll go to your project status chart, which is section A. This is a separate form. This is where you're going to be reporting on all of your grant goals and objectives. So as we look at this, you're either going to have Gepra objectives or project objectives. The Gepra do not change. They are always the same. We'll review those, but you'll want to know which ones are your Gepra and which ones are your project specific measures. Those are the ones that you determined when you started your project and that you've been reporting on, because none of you are brand new grantees. All of you have completed an APR before. You should be reporting on the same project objectives that you've reported on in previous years. If you're new in your position and you have not seen any previous APRs, that would be a great thing to go back and review. If for some reason you can't find any, please reach out and let us know, and we can help you with some of that past APR reporting. But just know that those project objectives that you have previously reported on, you're expected to continue reporting on throughout the life of your grant. So let's look at what that will look like. So you're going to report on them a little bit different for each type. So when you're thinking about one of your Gepra measures, you'll see that's this top row here. You'll indicate in measure type that it's Gepra. And then literally the only thing you're going to fill out is your actual performance data ratio. Okay. You don't have to put in all these X's. I just do that to try to make it a little clear that literally the only thing you're completing here is this number right here. Whereas for your project measures, those measures that are specific to your grant, you would have set a target in that measure. So for that one, you're going to indicate project, which in the reporting is PROJ. And then you're going to put in two numbers, your target ratio. So what was the goal ratio? And then your actual ratio right here. Those are the only numbers that you have to input. The system is going to calculate a percentage for you. You don't have to do that. It will actually take care of it for you. You'll notice that it will not be able to handle decimals. So this is a common question that comes up. If you put in a decimal, it's going to give you an error, and it can often be confusing because it doesn't really tell you what the error is for. It just says, I'm not taking your stuff, and it can be very frustrating. Make sure you don't have any decimals. You don't have any symbols of any kind. It can literally just take a number slash a number. The other things to be aware of, it can't take a 0 as a denominator. If for some reason you were trying to put a 0 as a denominator, it will also not take it. Hopefully you're not, because that would really throw off a ratio. But if for some reason you're trying to put that in, that is going to pop up an error for you. So decimals and zeros, freak it out. So those are the big ones there. Only ratio for Gepra, only target and actual ratio for project. And know that we are recording this session, and we are going to also send you the slide deck. So you're going to have all this information to reference. So if you're thinking you need to be taking screenshots and things, don't worry, we'll send that out to you. All right. As we think about that, so those Gepra measures are helping OIE and the department as a whole see the progress of your project in each grant program. The data that you're reporting should be for your current implementation year. So that 10/1/2020 to 9/30/2021, but you're only reporting on this period through that 3/1. So that's where it comes in that you may not have some of the data just yet, which is completely fine. If you do not have the data for one of these measures, whether it be Gepra or project, you're going to put 999 in instead of a ratio. You'll put it in the ratio box. It doesn't have to be 999 slash anything, just 999. And that lets G5 as well as Angela know, hey, I don't have the data right now, but I will. And they'll know to look back at your cover sheet to look at when you'll have the data available. If you put in a blank, that's not the correct answer, because that's not really letting them know, is your answer just nothing? Don't put in a 0, because it's going to take that. If you do like 0/12, Only do that if your answer is actually 0/12. If your answer is it's 0 now because I don't have the info yet, put that 999. 999 is always going to give you the ability then to come back and update that data. The next part is looking at your explanation of progress. So you're reporting your quantitative data at the top. That's where you're putting in those numbers. But down below is your explanation of progress, where you get to provide that more qualitative data. So I like to think of it as really providing that more full picture of what's going on behind those numbers. So the things that we'd like you to talk about in that explanation of progress is discuss, how you've either met that particular measure or you've made progress toward it. If you haven't met it yet, talk about why. Talk about the things that have happened that have caused you to be delayed or hurdles, and then what you're doing to address those challenges. Also talk about how your data is collected. So what are you doing with the data? How are you collecting that? Any evaluation methods, any analysis? This particularly comes into play often with your project objectives too. So I do want to review the Gepra though, particularly because we do have some folks who are newer to reporting.
Can I ask you to go back to
Yeah.
that prior slide? Thank you. I just want to add a couple of points here. You'll hear me keep talking about this, folks, as we go into the budget section and additional information. It is really critical, for example, if I'm just going to use the retention or the graduation Gepra point of if, for example, you know that as of now, March 1, you've got 0 out of maybe 10 that you planned on graduating. That's what goes in that quantitative section that Sarah just walked us through. The qualitative portion, meaning your explanation of that 0, becomes really important. So if you look in the chat, Carmelita, you had asked, I've got people that are still sort of in progress, right? And you don't have a result yet, either positive or negative, meaning you're projecting something. Well, I'd want that detail about, the likelihood, one, that you have any of those that aren't yet noted as graduating in a timely manner, meaning your numerical reporting, that you in fact clarify, one, that by September 30, you expect that 4 out of the 10 are definitely going to graduate. And you might also write in your qualitative, I have 6 that it remains to be seen because there are delays. There's the possibility that they're going to go into year 4. And I'm really referring to our FY18 cohort right now, because you have 2 induction years, as we know. So you really have 2 more project years. But letting me know there, and letting me know in all the places you should be letting me know, not just here, but here, what it means for budget, what it means for the other additional information section that we'll get to in a second. But here, I really want you to spell out, here's my projection, here's my best estimate, here's as much as I can tell you based on what I know. And what you know is what I want to know. So that qualitative section should be sharing some detail to help me understand how you're making that estimate. Meaning, going back to some of the conversations we've had, for instance, in our talking circle events, where you might be sharing things like, yeah, these other 6, I'm just not sure. One is way behind. They're not even 50% done when they should be, but the others really have 2 or 3 classes. It's just hard to know now, because there are other extenuating circumstances, family related, whatever. And I don't need the family story, but you get where I'm going. Just give me sufficient details so I know, one, what you're estimating and the basis for your estimation. That's really critical right now, especially because I'm asking you guys to report earlier. So just using your best guess is really important. Explaining that best guess is critical. I hope that's helpful to you guys as you're thinking through the qualitative section of the charts. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, and there was a related question. So if a participant has applied for graduation and commencement and they're in their last courses, but they don't actually walk until April 27th, should they still report them as having graduated on their APR reporting?
You should not. And in fact, one easy way to kind of think about it is your number in this chart, in the 524 charts, your number of graduates should match the number of graduates in the PDP DCS, meaning you wouldn't exit them out of the DCS system until they had actually graduated and completed. And it goes the same here. So I really should see a 1-to-1 in the numbers that you've reported in the DCS as of, March 31st, April 1st. You're reporting the same number or progress in the APR. The difference is the Ed 524 APR is giving you a place to explain those numbers, to give context and meaning to them. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about that, but really it shouldn't be any different. Those numbers should be the same because real time, it's your snapshot in time, right? I'm only asking you for a snapshot as of, the end of March, or, we're saying March 1 in this case, but really it shouldn't be any different. So just, I hope that helps in kind of thinking about how you're reporting in these two different places.
The feedback in the chat box says it helped.
Okay, great.
Great. All right, we'll pop back over to those Gepra. So remember, these are the Gepra measures that all of you are reporting on. It doesn't matter which grant you are, it doesn't matter what fiscal year you are, everybody reports on these Gepra. So you'll see there are 6 measures. The first regarding the percentage of participants in administrator preparation projects. And number 2 being the percentage of if I can say it, participants in teacher preparation projects. Now, for those of you who are not offering administrator preparation projects, you don't have to do number 1 because you don't offer that service. So that does only apply to those offering administrator preparation. And then same thing for number 2, only those offering teacher preparation will need to do 2. For the rest, 3 and 4, that applies to everybody. So who's getting licensed and have they completed their service requirement? 5 and 6 are back to the same thing. If you don't do administrator certification and preparation, we don't need to know cost per administrator, but you'll need to do cost per teacher or vice versa. So 1 and 2 depends on the services you provide, as does 5 and 6. 3 and 4 are for everybody. And if you offer both administrator and teacher, you're going to be doing all 6. The really important thing with the Gepra is the Gepra is a copy and paste. Okay. You cannot and should not change the wording. That means don't add in numbers into it. Don't add in any other details. You literally just copy and paste the Gepra word for word from what you see here into your APR reporting. Only with your project objectives were you able to change and set the wording the way you wanted, because those are your project specific objectives. For the Gepra, they have to be word for word from here.
Sarah, can you clarify for folks and just remind folks? So if, for example, I have a teacher training grant project and not an administrator grant, back to the 524 in the numerical section, what are they putting in? And they're not putting in 999 because it's not data that will come, right?
Right. Yeah. If you have a teacher program and you do not work with administrators, you're not putting in 999. You're not addressing this one. You're not including that in that reporting. All right. And let me show you what this will look like in the actual form, because I think that's helpful as well. So we've kind of talked through each of the pieces, and now here's some examples. So this first one is a Gepra example. So you'll notice I went with one that would be applicable to everybody. So the percentage of program participants who meet state licensure requirements, that's word for word from your Gepra. I put what year of implementation I'm in. So for this example, I'm in the 3rd year of my grant. Then you can see that I've got their Gepra marked because it is one of those preset Gepra measures. You'll notice I left the target ratio blank because for Gepra, I don't put anything in target, but I did complete my target ratio here. And remember, the system is going to populate a percentage for you. You don't have to enter that. You're just entering, say, 4 of your 7 participants, and then it's going to create that for you. And then down below, I'm putting in my explanation of progress. Yours will likely be much longer, but to try to make it a legible size on the screen, I just did like a little snippet. But you'll put all of that other great information explaining down below. Great question. If they meet the requirements for licensing, but they don't apply for the license, can they be included in the numbers? Yeah, and you can, if you can see Angela, you can see no. So unless they've actually received that license, they do not count. They have to actually apply for and receive it for it to count for this particular Gepra. All right, let's look at what it will look like for a project measure. So for this one, with your project measures, they're whatever you set again in your previous recording. Do keep in mind that the wording of these at this point should not be changing. It should be a copy and paste as far as the wording of the measure from your old reporting. So let's say that this was my measure, my year of implementation. This one's a project measure, so PROJ. And again, now I'm putting in a target and I'm putting in some actual. So I've got both in there now. Again, just the ratio, the system will create the percentage for you. And then your narrative down below to explain. And then I see one more question coming in. We do not exit them out until they've gotten their license, even if they've graduated, correct?
Sarah, sorry. In response to that question, I'll say a couple of things. One is that there's an expectation that you are exiting them out of the program once they've finished your training program, right? So that is before possibly them obtaining their license, earning their license, meaning before they've passed praxis. That doesn't give them any additional time, just to be clear, to, for example, get the license and then start the clock on service payback obligation. So that is something to keep in mind, and making sure that your participants understand that once you've exited them, you've exited them from the PDP DCS. And what that means is that clock starts, right? That 12 months to placement. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. You exit them, even though, for example, they might still have to get a license, and you, for example, as grantees, are still providing induction services. So that induction service time, for example, isn't captured in tracking their status. I mean, they've already exited, so there's no place, if you will, in the system for tracking induction services. And I'll just say that's as of right now, given that we now have final regulations on that, that might be something that we'll look to, and we might take some feedback about that in the future. But for now, just again, to answer that question, you are exiting them out if they have completed your training program. Now, I doubt it, but if a requirement of the training program was you have to have a license, then you're not, right? But for the most part, the expectation is they've completed your training program, they're exited out. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you. All right, we're about to move into the next section of the reporting. So if you have any questions on this one, go ahead and pop those in the chat box. Remember, as you're preparing these parts, if you're not sure of what your previous project objectives were in your reporting, look back at your old APRs. And if you are unable to access any of those, let us know, reach out and we can help with that. So the next section of the reporting is section B. B for budget. So everybody's favorite thing to talk about, your budget information. So this will be the next form in your reporting. And you'll see in this section that you're going to be writing a narrative that describes all the spending for the current project year. So remember, your reporting period for this is through March 1st. So you're going to be reporting that spending through March 1st. In this part, we want you to talk about the funds that you've expended, and by that we mean obligated, even if not reflected yet in G5 through the last day of the reporting period. So to recap, back on your cover sheet, that official first document, those numbers on number 8 should match with your G5 information. But when you're talking here, this is again, you did your quantitative reporting, and now's when you get to provide that fuller picture. So we want you to talk about, okay, not just what's shown in G5, but what have you obligated that might not have been drawn down from G5 yet through March 1st. And really talk through particularly any amounts that you might have remaining. Some of you may have some rather large sums remaining in certain categories. Talk through why that is, what your plan is for that moving forward. This is your chance to provide all of that context. Also, be sure to talk about your G5 drawdown frequency. So ideally, you would be drawing down at least monthly or at minimum quarterly. If that's not occurring, it's particularly important to explain why that might not be happening, what you're doing to try to remedy that. Also talk through, maybe it hadn't been happening, but now you've done something and fixed it, and now you think it's going to be fixed moving forward. Any of that information is very helpful. And then also how you're tracking expenditures independent of your budget office. So how are you within your project keeping track of what's being expended? And so you'll put all that in that narrative. Angela?
So let me add a little bit to this. I know that many of you received an email from me a couple of weeks back. And if you received that email from me a couple of weeks back that went out to many of our grantees, it was a request to give me some context and understanding for why G5 triggers what we'll call a high balance, right? A large available balance. And that gets triggered for a couple of reasons. One is because you wouldn't have drawn down in the first quarter of this project year, meaning between October 1 and December 31. In some cases, some drawdowns would have happened during that period of October 1 to December 31. However, they were minimal in comparison to the total available project balance as of the beginning of, I'll say, year 3 for our FY18 grantees who received this email from me. So what I asked you to do was to, one, tell me, kind of similar to what we're asking here, right? Is, yes, I see you have this available, you have this much drawn down, but tell me how much you expect to be drawing down. Frankly, for those of you that were timely and have responded to that, and I really appreciate you working with your budget offices to do that, you're going to just be able to augment what you've already sent to me. You're going to be able to probably just give any kind of updates to that, edit it as needed, and put it there to explain, one, the funds expended in G5 as of March 1st, and and again, that's to include any outstanding obligations, anything that hasn't been liquidated, funds haven't been liquidated for it. And then talking about maybe what challenges, and this might be going back to your budget office of, why didn't you guys draw anything down between October 1 and December 31st, even though at minimum, I would expect most of you have at least even salary costs, if nothing else. So those types of questions. I know that there tends to be lag in general around tuition and the drawing down of funds for tuition payment, stipend payment, et cetera. Just note that, just say, typically that doesn't happen for 45 days after, the the actual obligation is made. So whatever information you can provide to contextualize the delays is important. Giving us total budget information through 3/1. And we're going to talk about a little bit more about the other aspects that you guys have, again, have already provided some written text for, again, copy paste, of why you have delays, right? So you don't need to go into that level of detail here. There's going to be another section to explain the delay issue. But for the budgetary purposes or budget information purposes, I want to be sure everything drawn down in G5, everything obligated, but maybe not yet drawn down in G5 through March 1st. And then 3, any explanation to that helps to clarify why drawdowns haven't been happening at least once a quarter, if that in fact is the case for your particular grant. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
And that's the perfect lead in for section C, which is your additional information section. So we talked about before back in the executive summary that you're limited to 2 pages for that executive summary, but I promised there was somewhere else where you could put the rest of that information that you want to share. And we have arrived there. That is section C. So in section C, this is where you can document and highlight those great success stories, the challenges that have been encountered, the status of any partnerships that you have with your program. So what's going on with those partners and any key personnel changes that are happening. Now, do know that denoting a key personnel change in your APR does not automatically make that change. If you're needing to change your project director or certifying official, you'll still need to handle that outside of the APR, but you can denote that change or that upcoming change here in your narrative. Describe any possible changes specifically due to COVID-19 in your grants activities for the next budget period that are consistent. This is important with the scope and objectives of your approved application. So lots of us are having to modify and do things differently than we originally anticipated because of COVID-19, but we still have to maintain our project activities within the scope and objectives of our approved application. So things like carrying over training funds for students who might be delayed. So you can talk about your plans for something like that here, changing the delivery method of your induction service activities. We talked about many are now doing those via Zoom and things. That's fine. Talk about that here. Explain how you're adapting and making things work in this different environment. This is also where you can talk about delays due to student illness, remote delivery, all of those different things. Also provide any other appropriate information about the status of your project, including some unanticipated outcomes or benefits from your project. So if maybe because of all these things that have happened and the different ways you're handling things, you might have found some great unexpected benefits. Share those with us. We all would love some great lessons learned in there. Also in this area, indicate if you plan to request a no-cost extension for 2021-2022. So this is specifically for those of you who are fiscal year 2017 grantees. So if you're a fiscal year 2017 grantee and you are thinking at this point already that you're going to need a no-cost extension beyond the original end date of your grant in 2021-2022, include that information in section C. Let us know the estimated length of no-cost extension that you are going to want. So do you think you're going to need another 6 months, another year, up to a year? Sufficient details of what you're going to carry out during this period. So what do you need to do during that period to complete the goals and objectives of your project? And the estimated amount of funding that you're going to need in order to accomplish this. So that's for those of you who are fiscal year 2017 and are anticipating the need for a no-cost extension. If you're a fiscal year 2018 grantee, now this slide's for you. Talk through if you think you're going to have carryover. So this basically applies to very many of you. Provide that estimated amount of carryover that you expect to have at the end of year 3. So as of September 30th, approximately how much do you think you're going to have in carryover? Provide sufficient detail about what dollar amount, if any, you're going to need in year 4 or 5. Okay, so you can see the examples. Travel couldn't occur in year 3, but now in year 4, we expect to send 5 participants to a professional conference in spring of 2022 at the cost of about $700 a person. So we're going to need to carry over $3,500 for this particular activity. Don't say, we're going to need carryover to send participants to a conference. We need more information than that. The more detailed you are, the more likely that things will just move smoothly along with that. When you put the generalities, then we have to do lots of follow-up questions and it just drags things out for you. Then also think about participants who need to continue training during what should be the induction phase. So they should be moving into induction for years 4 and 5, but you may have some students who, because they are delayed, are going to be continuing part of your actual training program during that time. So how many students is that going to be, or do you anticipate that being? And then project that dollar amount that you think you're going to need in order to allow each of them to complete their training. So same thing, give great details here. If you think you're going to have 3 students who, because of delays, are going to need to continue on into years 4 and or 5, just like you see in the example, maybe $18,000 a year, and then one at $6,000 a year for year 4. So put that into that information so that there's lots of great detail on any delayed participants and the carryover expenses that will go along with them.
Sarah, let me add a few points here for folks. One is that I want to really emphasize here for our FY18 grantees, we've been having these conversations about the likelihood of delays for many of your students, most often COVID related. That's fine. That said, we're not going to be talking about no cost extensions among the FY18 cohort because you have 2 more years. So really the focus should be for this next year. What are you planning on getting done? And, and this idea of, I do expect to have these needs for my students, again, and I would add here in the level of detail, I need this much for next year because I know they're delayed and they've got to take full-time courses over the next 2 semesters for sure. I am fine with you also itemizing and giving detail about the possibility that they might need it into the following year. Why is that important? Because I am going to look at the level of detail, i.e. the itemized costs, as I consider your continuation award and how much carryover you really need. So, this is not a secret. I want to be really transparent. I want to give you the funds you need to be able to help people be successful. But it's not going to be a blanket, let's just let you carry over everything, because that's also not ideal for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is I would much rather make available funds for things you need, and also any things you don't need, make funds available for a new competition in FY21, wink, wink. So I think really understanding, where's the funding going to be best used? Is it with a whole new cohort, or is it with, just in case you need it? So there should be no just in case I need it fund. It really should be about, I really need these funds, and I want to kind of add and contextualize again what we've been talking about in our talking circles, which is add to it, be conservative and say, yeah, I do have a policy that I'm going to let these students take it twice if they need it, or I've got to factor in those praxis costs and I'm going to let them take it 3 times. Factoring in all those costs as you're projecting out about how much carryover you need, factor all of those things into that cost, but tell me what those are. If you don't, and I get the vague, yep, we're going to need costs for these students for 3 years, and you're not going to take the time to itemize it, I'm not going to do that for you. That's your job. So I have every expectation you're going to give me your best guess scenario. And yeah, if something's not clear, I will absolutely follow up with you on it. But there is time sensitivity involved in what you provide. So if you want to talk about this stuff, we've got a month and a half to do that. Feel free to set up time with me. If you want to make sure that what I need is what you're able to give me, then do that. But again, I'm not going to talk about no cost extensions for FY18s. You should be thinking about that in your head to the extent you want to be able to provide induction services down the line, but that's not the conversation for the purposes of getting funding for this next year 4, which should be induction, and to the extent that you need carryover to support the ongoing training of any delayed participants. So just know the more detail, the better. And I'm happy to help you think through how to document that to make sure you get what you need to support your students. I had one other question I wanted just to jump back to. And Kelly, thank you for that question. You asked about the charts that we've used in prior years for the APR. And Sarah, you're familiar with the budget charts that give sort of, now and projection, give various columns. We will share that out with you. You are not required to use it. That said, it makes it a lot easier sometimes to really see, current projected. So we will send that out under separate cover. But again, I want to be really clear and be very careful. What you're required to complete is what we're walking through today. If you want to provide that additional information in the way of a chart, that would be wonderful because it makes life a lot easier, I think, for all of us. But it is not a required part of the reporting. So I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah. And we'll send that out with the presentation slides.
Did I miss any other questions?
There's just one more. So I'm worried that my no cost extension will be short due to students retaking courses and not passing praxis. What's the likelihood some induction funds could be levied to help finish them out and those students only receiving 1 year of induction?
Again, I won't have that conversation until next year when you know better where you are. I mean, I think you make your best guess. This is snapshot in time, guys. So while we've been having these broader conversations about planning long-term, mid to long-term, this is a snapshot in time. This is my best guess about what needs to happen for next year. So, you do that. That's what I need today. But we can keep having those conversations about the implications of those delays, right? Of being able to support your participants with 2 years of induction and what makes sense and what doesn't. I would also ask, don't make the assumption that if you are interested in, apply for, and are fortunate enough to get a new grant award for PD, that you're simply going to shift everybody over, because that's not the purpose of a new award. So I want to be really clear about that. Don't expect that, okay, I don't need to worry about an NCE, I'm going to shift everybody over. That is not the purpose of a new application. We would expect that you would be recruiting a whole new set of folks for a 5-year period of training and corresponding induction for a minimum of 2 years, and not really about moving these people over. That's what a no cost extension is for. So I just be thinking about those things over the long term. And I know I'm asking you to think about 2 very different points in time, but that's really critical. I don't want you to oversell it. We're focused on right now and what you need carrying these folks out. So I'm not concerned about, no cost extensions again for the FY18. For FY17, again, there are a couple of folks that I know are on, and thank you for being on from our FY17, also with high balances. And as you think through what's the best way to support, be thinking about the length of that extension period. Most of our 16s, just FYI for everybody, I know we're really short on time, Sarah, I'm sorry,
No.
have moved into no cost extension period. So don't be afraid of that. I think as long as you're planning and budgeting accordingly and letting us know and talking to us, that's what's important. So I hope that's helpful. And we know and certainly are sensitive to the COVID related impacts on your project. I can't emphasize that enough. Next
And I
slide.
know we are at time. We're going to keep going because we do have just a few bits more of information. If you need to go to another event, though, we completely understand. Remember, this is being recorded. We will send that out to you, so you're not going to completely miss anything. And if you're able to stay on, fabulous. If you do have to hop, though, please take a minute to fill out the feedback form. There's my little plug as we keep going.
And we're almost there, just a couple other slides. So earlier I talked about having sent out large available balance notifications to many of our 18s. This is a snapshot, just sharing. It's many of you. And the percentage is the percentage of funds that are still sitting in your account as of yesterday. So when I talk back to, that budget section of describing and contextualizing your obligations to date, this is why. This is really important. So, and again, many of you have responded with your written feedback about large available balance. So I'm really looking for you to just augment a lot of what you've already provided to me, frankly. And so you're already on your way for that, for the purposes of the budget section. I hope that's helpful.
And if you're wondering if this is you on the list and you're trying to frantically consult your PR number, remember, I'm going to send you the slides so you can leisurely check your PR number. Don't worry.
Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. Just reminders about it already being open for reporting. It's the grant project director on record that has to submit. It's due, we have the 29th here, but I think it should be 31st, right?
I don't know.
Oh no, 29th is a Friday, is that right?
Yeah.
So it's a Friday. Sorry, guys, it is the 29th at 4:30. And if you have any challenges with uploading the reports and or the cover sheet, you can always send them directly to me if you have to. Feel free to do that. But again, you've got a little over a month and a half now to prepare the report. So if I don't want anybody not sleeping at night for this. So please set up some time with me if you want to talk through it. But it really doesn't need to be that painful, and know that if I have a lot of questions, I will certainly be reaching out to you on that.
And just a couple of reminders here as well. Please do not wait until the last day to try to upload things and complete things in the G5 system. Just a warning that it does on those due dates tend to slow down a good bit, and you may become frustrated with upload and saving speeds and possibly being kicked out. The second reminder being, if you have not gotten to experience the glorious G5 system before, you may not be familiar with the timeout issue. It does have, for security purposes, the timeout process, where if it does not think that you have done something recently enough, it will time you out. Unfortunately, typing in some of the narrative boxes, it does not count as being active. So I would highly encourage you, particularly for those like explanations of progress and sections B and C, those things that are going to be that longer narrative, type it in a Word document, type it somewhere else, and just cut and paste it in. It will save you a lot of headache, because if for some reason you get kicked out before it has completely saved, then it will still be there and you will not have to start over and have that great frustration. So that is my big frustration saving tip of the day.
And one last thing, Sarah, I did go in G5 right now and just confirm, guys, it is March 29th. Okay, it is that Monday, March 29. So just wanted to make sure that was clear for everybody. Thank you.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but if you have other questions, please go ahead and pop those up there. But I'm going to pop up our typical end of event poll as we go ahead and wrap here, and also our contact information. So remember, as you're starting to do this, like Angela said, thankfully you have about a month and a half to be able to complete that. So if you need to reach out to her for clarification on anything, you have time to do that. If you are having any trouble actually completing the report, the system's giving you trouble, or you're having a question about making sure that you're entering something in correctly, please feel free to reach out to the TA team. We're here to help you with this and help make it as painless as possible, and also ensure that you're doing some really great reporting that paint a really clear picture of the wonderful things going on in your program. So you'll see the contact info there, both for the TA team and for Angela again. And there was a question about 2016 awardees do not fill out APR, rather a final report. So yes, if you are a 2016 grantee, you are not completing an APR, you do not necessarily have anything due on March 29th, your final performance report, which is reflective of your entire grant period, is due on the date referenced in the letter that you should have received through G5 from Angela. If you can't find that, or you need to know that information, please reach out and we can help you find that as well. But it should be 120 days after the end of your no cost extension. So if your no cost extension ended the end of January, then likely your due date is going to be the end of May. So you can kind of do that general math, but if you need the exact date, please reach out and we can help you find that if you can't find it in that G5 notification.
And I'll just further clarify, you're not turning an APR in 2016 grantees in G5. You are reporting any participant data that needs to be updated in the PDP DCS system, which is what we had already walked through last week. Okay.
All right. I don't see any other questions, but like I said, if you have some right now, feel free to pop that in the chat box. We'll stay on for just a couple more minutes, but thank you for joining us today. Please take a minute to complete that feedback survey that Sarah Whitehead has popped in the chat box. Those are really actually very helpful for us. We've gotten lots of great feedback and information that we incorporate into our future events from that. So it's super short, takes 3 minutes, but otherwise we will see you at least next Friday for our PD talking circle for February. And Luann, yes, if you are in the STEP grant as well, then we do have another event at One Mountain, but that is the STEP talking goal. And yes, the due date is March 29th.
Yeah.
Yeah, March 29th by 4:30. But we're all going to be overachievers and it'll be done by like the 27th. So we don't have to get angry at G5.
Yes.
All right. Okay, well, I think we've addressed all the questions. Remember, we'll be sending out those slides and everything via email. If you have any questions, please reach out and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.